Viktor Petrov was a man made of ice and iron. As a high-level structural engineer from the gray, towering blocks of Moscow, he viewed the world through the lens of logic, math, and cold, hard cash. To Viktor, the Philippines wasn't a land of culture or heart. It was simply a tropical postcard he had purchased for a 3-week vacation. He arrived at Ninoy Aquino International Airport with a scowl on his face, clutching a leather bag filled with expensive Nikon cameras and a wallet thick with US dollars and elite black credit cards. He treated the smiling airport staff with a cold nod and viewed the humidity of Manila as a personal insult to his comfort. He was a man who knew the price of everything, but understood the value of absolutely nothing. The disaster happened on a Tuesday that started like any other. Viktor decided to visit a bustling local market, hoping to snap some authentic photos of the chaos to show his friends back in Russia. But amidst the sea of people, the smell of street food and the roar of jeepneys, a shadow moved faster than his expensive camera lens could focus. In a split second of distraction, a professional pickpocket sliced through his pocket with the precision of a surgeon. Viktor didn't feel a thing. It wasn't until 30 minutes later, when he reached into his trousers to pay for a souvenir, that he felt the cold, terrifying emptiness. His wallet was gone, his passport, his emergency cash, his identity vanished into the humid Manila air. The first 6 hours were a whirlwind of rage. Viktor stormed into a local precinct, his face a shade of angry crimson that matched the sunset. He shouted at the officers in broken, aggressive English, demanding they find his stolen property immediately. But without a passport or any form of identification, the bureaucracy turned into a brick wall. When he marched back to his 5-star hotel, the luxury he had paid for turned into a cage. The manager, though apologetic, could not let a man without a passport or a valid credit card back into a premium suite. The very security guards who had saluted him that morning now stood with their arms crossed, blocking the entrance to the lobby. Viktor was a king who had been stripped of his crown in a single afternoon. By the second day, the reality of his situation began to sink in like a heavy stone. He spent the night on a hard wooden bench in a public plaza, his expensive shirt now wrinkled and stained with the salt of his own sweat. His stomach began to growl, a deep, painful sound he hadn't heard in years. He tried to approach people for help, but his Russian toughness worked against him. When he asked for a phone or a few pesos, his voice was deep and demanding because of his fear. To the local Filipinos, he didn't look like a victim. He looked like a dangerous, unstable foreigner. Mothers clutched their children tighter as they passed him, and street vendors shooed him away from their stalls, fearing he would cause trouble. By the third day, Viktor Petrov was a ghost of his former self. He sat on a piece of discarded cardboard near a small, humble carinderia on the edge of a busy road. The smell of sautéed garlic and boiling beef soup was a form of torture. He watched a young boy, no older than 10, happily eating a bowl of rice with his bare hands. Viktor, the man who used to fly first class and eat at Michelin star restaurants, felt a tear roll down his cheek. He was starving, he was thirsty, and most of all, he was completely alone in a city of millions. He put his head between his knees, hiding his face as the shame finally broke his spirit. He realized that without his money, he was nothing. He was just a tall, hungry man waiting for the end. He didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching. He only felt a light, warm pressure on his shoulder. Viktor looked up, his eyes bloodshot and weary, expecting to see a policeman telling him to move along. Instead, he saw a man who looked like he had lived 1,000 lives in the sun. It was Mang Jun, an elderly newspaper vendor with a face as wrinkled as a dried mango and a smile that held no judgment. Mang Jun didn't say a word. He didn't ask for a passport or a credit card. He simply reached into a small plastic bag and pulled out a warm, soft piece of Pandasol and a chilled bottle of water. As Viktor took the bread, his hands trembling, the old man sat down right next to him on the dirty sidewalk. "Eat, friend," Mang Jun said in a quiet, gravelly voice. "Today you hungry, tomorrow God provide." Viktor took a bite, and the simple sweetness of the bread tasted better than any feast in Moscow. He looked at the man who had almost nothing, yet gave him everything he needed to survive another hour. Viktor realized then that his elite life had been a lie. and his real life was only just beginning on this dusty Manila curb. Mang Jun didn't just give Viktor bread, he gave him a piece of his soul. As the sun began to set over the jagged skyline of Manila, the old man gestured for the towering Russian to follow him. They walked deep into the heart of a nearby barangay, moving through narrow, winding alleys where the smell of charcoal smoke and laundry soap filled the air. Finally, they reached a tiny structure made of mismatched plywood and rusted corrugated tin. It was a home held together by hope and nails, a place Viktor would have considered a slum just days ago. But as he stepped inside, he was met with a warmth that no five-star heating system in Moscow could ever replicate. Mang Jun's wife, ailing Rosa, didn't flinch at the sight of the giant, disheveled foreigner entering her kitchen. She simply nodded, pulled out a plastic stool, and told him to sit. There was no interrogation, no suspicion, and no judgment. They served a humble dinner of dried fish, sautéed vegetables, and a large pot of steaming white rice. Viktor watched in silence as the family divided the food. He noticed that Mang Jun and Rosa took only small portions of the fish, pushing the bulk of the protein onto his plate and the plates of their 3 grandchildren. They were sacrificing their own nutrition for a stranger who had arrived with nothing. Viktor, who had spent his life competing for the biggest bonuses and the highest status, sat in that dimly lit room and felt a profound sense of shame. He realized that these people were poor by the world's standards, but they were the wealthiest humans he had ever encountered. That night, Viktor slept on a thin woven mat on the floor. The family gave him their only electric fan to keep the tropical heat away from his skin, while they slept in the stillness of the humid air. He lay there listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, the distant bark of a dog, the laughter of neighbors, the hum of a tricycle, and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't feel the pressure to be someone. He felt safe. The next morning, Mang Jun woke him up early. The old man reached under his bed and pulled out a small dented biscuit tin. Inside was a roll of worn-out peso bills, 2,000 pesos in total. It was the money Mang Jun had been saving for months to pay for his granddaughter's school supplies and uniform. Without a word of complaint, he pressed the money into Viktor's large, calloused hand. "Go to your embassy," Mang Jun said, his voice steady and kind. "They will help you go home now." Viktor tried to push the money back, his heart heavy with the weight of the sacrifice. He knew what this money represented, but Mang Jun closed Viktor's fingers over the bills and smiled. "Money is just paper, my friend, but a brother is a brother forever. Go." That afternoon, with the smell of the Manila streets still on his clothes and the kindness of a stranger in his heart, Viktor finally made it through the gates of the Russian embassy. 6 months passed. In the barangay, life went on as usual. The memory of the tall Russian became a story Mang Jun told his grandchildren at night, a story about a lost traveler who found his way. Mang Jun never expected to see Viktor again. In his mind, the 2,000 pesos was a gift to the universe, not a loan to be repaid. But one Tuesday afternoon, the quiet of the alley was shattered by the sound of heavy engines. 3 large black SUVs and a white construction truck pulled up to the entrance of the narrow street. Men in suits stepped out, but the man leading them was unmistakable. It was Viktor Petrov. He was no longer the angry, arrogant man who had arrived in the Philippines. His face was soft, and his eyes were filled with a mission. He found Mang Jun sitting on his usual stool, selling the morning's papers. The reunion was silent at first. The 2 men simply hugged, the Russian giant weeping openly on the shoulder of the small Filipino elder. Then, Viktor signaled to the men behind him. What happened next remains the talk of the town to this day. Viktor hadn't just come to pay back the 2,000 pesos. He had spent the last 6 months working tirelessly back in Russia to fix his life and organize a massive project. He revealed that he had purchased the entire block of land where the neighborhood stood, not to evict the residents, but to give them the land. He handed Mang Jun a set of keys and a legal deed. In place of the plywood hut, Viktor's company began building a modern, earthquake-proof 2-story home for Mang Jun's family, fully furnished and equipped with a library for the grandchildren. But the shocking part of the reward was the foundation Viktor established in Mang Jun's name. He deposited 10 million pesos into a trust fund dedicated to the education and healthcare of every child in that specific barangay. Viktor realized that he couldn't pay Mang Jun back for the soul he had found, but he could make sure that no child in Mang Jun's world would ever have to go hungry or skip school again. Viktor Petrov arrived in Manila as a man who had everything but felt empty. He left as a man who had been stripped of his pride so that he could finally be filled with the one thing money can't buy: the true heart of a Filipino.